Hi everybody, John from Learning Plan here, and today we're going to look at creating an Adobe Captivate file with branching. We're also going to look at implementing branch aware, where we have quiz questions in each of the separate branches. As an extra, towards the end, we're going to create a random experience for the user by implementing some JavaScript. Okay, so here's our mud map of how these types of branching Captivate files could look. So we could start off with all users going through an introduction. So all users experience the same beginning of the Captivate file. Then they move on to a situation where they can either select which branch they want to go down, or, as we'll see later on, we can implement some JavaScript, some very simple JavaScript to create a random experience for the end user. This branching can happen multiple times throughout a project. With our example, we're just going to have one branch where the users will go down a single branch and they will all meet back on a common branch, and then the quiz results will be presented as an overall results based on the questions that were taken in the one branch and also the questions that were taken in the common branch. But of course we could continue the branches if we wanted to. Let's have a look at a finished Captivate file which has branching implemented. There is also branch aware in there as well, which is a feature that allows Captivate to only take into account the quiz question results or the points from quiz questions that are in one branch that is taken by the user. So for example, if there are 3 branches that users can go down and they don't need to go down the other 2 branches, then the overall quiz results will only take into account the one branch that the user went down and won't take into account the other questions from the other branches. We can also look at creating a common branch at the end. We're not actually going to build this exact project. This project is available for you to go through yourself. Just click on the link in the description below and you'll be able to go through this example. What we will be building as part of this demonstration, a basic foundation project which has all of the mechanics in place, and then we'll just leave it up to you to add your own design and flair. But essentially what we have here is the Captivate project, where we've got the start screen, which normally will just be a blank white screen with the play button in the middle. What we've done is we've incorporated a custom image to be superimposed as part of that screen. Of course, we need to click on the play button in order to continue and to start the module. What we've done in this particular example is we've just got a bit of an introduction where users can go through the introduction. There may be some instructions, a little bit of a welcome, what the objectives are. Also down the bottom, we have a text shape which just contains variable values, and this is really just for testing purposes. We wouldn't leave this information in the bottom for the end published result, but we've put these variables in here to allow us to do some testing, some bug testing, for example, and to get certain values which allow us to implement functionality. For example, we've got the frame count here, and this has allowed us to create a replay slide functionality. And by clicking on this replay intro button, what this does is it goes back to the beginning of the slide by calling on a system variable within Captivate, which is essentially saying go to a frame and then resume playback. So I'll just give you a quick look and see how that works. So we click on replay intro, just takes us back to the beginning of that slide. But of course we can skip intro, and that's just a normal go to next slide. What we've got now is we've got the screen where normally a user would select the branch that they want to go down. Now in this particular example, we've got 3 branches, and each branch is containing information related to a state of Australia. So we've got a branch which talks about Queensland, we've got a branch that talks about New South Wales, and we've got a branch which talks about South Australia. We'll create the example first where users get to select their branch and they choose which branch they want to go down. But in this particular example, which is what we're working towards, we have created a random experience. What happens here is clicking on the arrow button, in this case, executes some JavaScript, which then executes navigating to a random branch, which the user doesn't have any control over. So if I just click this button here, you'll see what it's done is it's landed me in New South Wales. When you go to experience the same module, you might find that you'll go down a different branch. We'll have a look at incorporating this randomness a little bit later. Everything else works as it would based on the user selecting the branch. So if I go down the New South Wales branch, and if I click on this, it then gives me some information which I need to read. And then what I can do here is, after I've read the information, I then click on the next button. It then has a question about that information. Now, what we find a lot of the times is learning experiences are designed in a way that sometimes see users on a question. What can happen is users are given unlimited attempts at answering the question. If they don't know the answer, they'll just guess it until they get the question right. And there's no way for them sometimes to go back and review the information because they either might have missed it or they might have just clicked ahead. What we've done here is we've implemented a situation where the user gets one attempt at answering the question. If they don't get the question right, then they get sent back to the screen that contains the information. And this is a way to reinforce learning. If we don't get the question right and I attempt the question, it says I don't get it right. It then sends me back to the information. And then what we've actually got incorporated within this button here is an action called Return to Quiz. And what this allows us to do, the user to go back and have another attempt at the question. So we click on this button, which actually has Return to Quiz incorporated within the button. The user gets another go. If they get it wrong again, they will then have to go back to the information and try and understand the information and then come back to the question. So this does go around an infinite number of times, but of course that helps to reinforce the learning. And we would like to think that hopefully they will get it at least after the second or third attempt. We can then continue. We can have some more information. For example, once I've read the information, I can then attempt the question. Once again, if I get the question wrong, it sends me back to the screen or the number of screens that have that information in it. And then once again, we've got a Return to Quiz button in here, and then users can have another attempt at answering that question. Now what happens is the users then join a common branch. All users, regardless of the branch that they just went down, will then arrive at the same screen, which is this one. What we've got here is we've just got a little advanced action which just displays some text based on the last slide that was visited. And you can see down the bottom, we've got the display. We're displaying the variable, which displays the value of the last slide. Based on the last slide that was visited, we can then display certain information in this screen. We then continue on. Once again, this is common branch, which everyone will experience. I'd like to shout out to parksaustralia.gov.au for this information here. We then click on the next button, which is in fact, that's not a Return to Quiz. Oh, actually that might be the Return to Quiz there. So you'll see what happens here. Because I hadn't been on the quiz question beforehand, it's just treated like a normal next button. Here's another normal go to next slide button. I then get to experience the question. If I get it wrong, I then get taken back to the slide that contains the relevant information. And then when I click on this button, I bypass that next screen, which I experienced before, and then I get to attempt the question again. If I get it right, of course, it will then continue me on. And what we can see here is that we have scored the maximum number of points. There were 3 total questions and I got 3 correct, which means I got 100%. In the actual file, which we'll see shortly, there were 7 questions all up. So there were another 4 questions or 2 questions in each of the other branches that I didn't go down. But because we had branch aware turned on, then those questions that I didn't need to answer, they don't get incorporated or included as part of the final result. We can also allow users to review the quiz, so they can go back and review the questions and the answers just as an extra little bit of reinforcement if they want to. Of course, they're going to get the questions correct because that's how we've set it up, but at least we didn't give them unlimited attempts at the question, so they then had to guess the answer. We sent them back to the information, so the learning was reinforced, and then at least they could have another attempt at the question. And then of course we can continue on if we want. Just one last little extra JavaScript trick we've got in here. Under this button is a little JavaScript which actually reloads the whole screen without the user needing to look for the reload button or the refresh button on the browser. And then we can just have another attempt at it if we want. We may not include this as part of the published experience on a learning management system, but we just wanted to put that in here for this example, so as people were going through this, they could test the randomness of the JavaScript. And just have a quick look here. I'm going to skip the intro again. I'm going to click on the arrow again, and this time I'm taken to South Australia. So let's flick over to Captivate to see how this particular project was put together. So we'll have a quick little overview of this particular project in Captivate, and then what we're going to do is build the foundations of this project just to get the mechanics working. So let's flick over to Captivate now. Now here I am in Captivate, and in actual fact I am looking at what's called the branching view in Captivate. If you haven't seen this view, I'm just going to close this window down. I'm going to go back into the window menu and then branching view. And what this does is it gives us a bit of a helicopter view of the flow of the project. And you'll see that this looks quite similar to my mud map here, where I've got an introduction and then I've got the branches appearing, and then I've got a common branch where people go down, and then of course we could have more branches. But if we look at this particular example here, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. We've got the first couple of slides which are common for all users, and then you'll see that the second slide branches off into 3 separate paths. So we've got the first path along the top here, which has South Australia. We've got the second path, which has New South Wales, and the third path, which has Queensland. You'll see at each question, there is a red return to quiz. I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see that. And that's basically showing me that for each question, if we get it correct, or sorry, if we get it wrong, I should say, we jump back to the slide, in this case slide 6. If I get question on slide 7 wrong, if I get the question on slide 13 wrong, I jump back to slide 12, and if I get the question on slide 17 wrong, I then jump back to slide 16. And then of course if I get it right, I continue on, and the same with these other questions that appear here. I then go back to the previous slides that contain the information relevant to that question. So once again, we're looking at reinforced learning as opposed to just leaving people on a quiz question to have unlimited guesses at the question and they're not really learning anything. They're just answering the question to actually move on. You'll see also what happens here towards the end here, that the 3 branches then continue on the common branch, which in this case is slide 20. And then we continue on the common branch towards the end. There's some common information. There is a quiz question that everybody needs to do. And once again, they go back to the relevant information. At each of the slides that contain the relevant information for the corresponding question, we've got the return to quiz functionality set up as well. So that's pretty much it as a helicopter view. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create this project. We'll create the foundations of this project really from a mechanical perspective. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on design, but I just want to highlight and show you how we implement the mechanics to this. So let's have a look at creating a new project in Captivate. And I'll leave this one open because I might need to grab a few things from it. Okay, so we're going to go into File, New Project, and then Blank Project, or Control N. The dimensions that I'm going to choose here are 1280 by 720, and we're going to click on OK. Now, of course, I'll get one screen, and I will just I'll click to add title. I don't necessarily need to use this, but I'll do this anyway. I'll just call this branch aware. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the menu slide, or the slide that contains the buttons where users can choose which path they go down. Now I'm going to use the shortcut key Control-Shift-J to insert my new slide. The first stage of building this project, we're going to look at creating the experience where users can choose the path that they go down. So I'm just going to create 3 buttons here. I will continue with the theme that we looked at before, choosing locations within Australia. So I've got a button here. I've got a shape I'm going to use as button. I'm actually going to take rollover off, and I'm going to take the down state off as well. Down, so I'm just going to delete those states. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to duplicate this button, Control D to duplicate, and then I'm going to do Control D again to duplicate. So I've now got the 3 buttons which allow users to select which path they want to go down. And I'm just going to type in NSW for the first button. I'm going to type in QLD for the second button, and I'm going to type in SA for South Australia for the third button. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the 3 landing pages for those 3 branches. Now there's a reason why I'm putting these 3 landing pages in sequential order, and this is so we can get the JavaScript to work later on, but you can still apply this the same approach even if you weren't using JavaScript. I'm going to create a brand new slide, Control-Shift-J. I'm just going to call this, I'm just going to put a label in here, and I'm going to call it New South Wales landing page, like so. Actually, what I might do is I'm just going to use a predefined master slide. There you go, so that's fine. What I'm going to do now, add a system variable into the title shape along the top there, and this system variable is an Adobe Captivate system variable, which essentially is going to display the information that is in the slide label. So I can display the information that is part of the slide label in the actual slide itself without retyping it. The way I do this is I need to be in edit mode of the shape. I'm going to select all of the text that's in there. Inside the style properties panel, just below the text alignment buttons, I'm going to click on the button that says insert variable. We can then select the variable type as system. Under variables, I'm going to select the system variable called cpinfo current slide label, and then click on OK. 50 characters should be enough. What this is going to allow us to do, I'll just do a quick preview inside of Captivate's preview mode, and just quickly moving through here, and I haven't set up any buttons yet. I'll just forward there, and you'll see how the contents of the slide label is now appearing as the slide title, and I didn't need to retype that information. Of course, that's going to be handy if we decide to update the slide label for any reason. It's also going to be handy now, because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this New South Wales landing page, and of course I can select the slide over in the film strip view over on the left hand side. I can either right mouse click and duplicate, or you'll see there the shortcut key is Control D. So I'm just going to do Control D. I'm going to change the label just to say QLD landing page, then press enter. When this project is previewed or published, that variable, the system variable, will automatically reflect the slide label for the slide that it's in. I'll go back over on the left hand side and I'll duplicate this slide, and I'm going to call this one SA landing page. So I've now got the 3 landing pages set up. I'm now going to go back to slide 2, which has my buttons in there. I haven't implemented any actions against these buttons. I'm going to do that now. Just before we do this, however, let's go in and have a quick look at the branching view, because I want to show you a before and after view of the branching view. So if we go into window and then branching view, you'll see what the branching view is showing us is essentially a linear approach to this project. We can't see any branches at all because we actually haven't set up any navigation to define the branching. So I'm just going to close out of the branching view for a moment. What we're going to do now is we're going to set up navigation from the from each of the buttons to go to each of the landing pages. So if I click on the New South Wales button, I'm then going to go into Actions, and on success, jump to Slide. Clicking on the Slide drop down menu. Because I've labeled my slides, you'll see my slide labels are appearing in here as well, which is going to make it easier for me to reference the slide that I'm after, especially if I've got a lot of slides and I'm jumping to a slide that's further down in the list of slides. I could have many slides in here. At the moment, it's quite easy, but I'm just going to click on New South Wales landing page. I'm going to go into the Queensland button. Once again, on success, jump to Slide, and I'm going to jump to the Queensland landing page. The SA button, I want to jump to Slide, and then I'm going to select SA landing button like so. Before I go any further, I am going to go into each of my buttons, or I only actually need to go into one button. I want to implement a hand cursor and disable click sound, which means that when the user hovers over that button or moves over their button, the cursor will change to a hand, which is what is expected in a web experience, and also disabling the click sound so it doesn't click every time we click on the button. And to apply these changes to every button without needing to go into every button, I can just go to the right of the word display where it says apply to all. I can click on apply to all items of this type. I'm just going to get out of the way here so you can see what I've done here, and I've just clicked on hand cursor and disable click sound. So hopefully my chair isn't in the way. I'm just going to get out of the way there so you can see that, and you'll see the disable click sound. Okay, we can go into apply to all items of this type, and once I've done that, it will then apply those changes to the other buttons, and you'll see when I click on these other buttons here that that setting or those settings have been applied. It doesn't apply to future buttons, so I will need to remind myself to go back in here and do this every now and then. But now that we've set up these buttons, let's go in and have a look at the branching view. Now, just a little bit of a word of warning here. Sometimes the branching view can take a while to actually update itself based on what's going on. So hopefully it has updated itself. You'll see that it hasn't actually updated itself. So what I might need to do here is what I sometimes find is if I've got another file open, I'll actually go back and click on that file and then go back and click on the file that I'm working on. So if we go into Window Branching View now, and you'll now notice that the branching has been set up and it has been displayed. That's the first step. So we're one step down, and we have created the starting point of how branching works. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start implementing the content pages for each of our branches. To create branches, you don't necessarily have to have the slides in sequential order. Once again, I just want to reiterate the reason I've got these slides in sequential order is because these slides are going to be landing slides from the JavaScript, which I'm going to implement after this. But if we just go back, and we're now going to implement the first New South Wales information page. So just from the last slide, once again, I'm just going to do Control-Shift-J to implement a new slide. And then I'm going to just grab my content master layout again. I'll just put in New South Wales information slide 1. Like so. Once again, I will just, as a reminder, let's have a look to see how we can implement that system variable. Going in to select current slide label, click on OK. What I can do here is I can just put some information about New South Wales. So for example, Sydney is the capital of New South Wales. I'm going to duplicate the information slide. And I'm going to go into the slide label of the new information slide, change that to 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to insert a question slide, which is going to quiz our users based on the information that they've just read. We can now, from slide 7, we can insert a quiz and question slide. I'm just going to make this multiple choice, but any question slide will do. And I'm going to click on OK. And here I'm going to say, what is the capital of New South Wales? And we can put some answers in here. Now, a couple of things that we need to do here is, first of all, if we go and have a quick look at the branching view again, so let's go into quiz and branching view, you'll see that these new slides that we've set up are now branching off the South Australia landing page, simply because we haven't set up navigation from the New South Wales landing page onto the information related to New South Wales. So let's fix that first. So we need to go back to our New South Wales landing page. I'm just going to grab one of the buttons from the branching menu screen. So I'm just going to copy this button. I'm going to go back to New South Wales landing page. I'm going to place this button down the bottom right hand corner. I'm just going to say here continue. I'm just going to put in a little welcome here. Welcome. That'll do. Of course, what we need to do now is we need to ensure that this button that we've just put in is navigating to the right slide. And if we look in our film strip view, we can see that that is actually going to be slide 6, New South Wales information slide. So on success, we want to jump to slide. The slide that we want to jump to is, of course, slide 6. We can now, I'm just actually going to save this file. Let's have a look and see what the branching view looks like now. So if we go into window and then branching view, you'll see that it hasn't actually updated, because that's the thing that I was talking about before, where branching can sometimes take a little while to catch up with itself. What I might do here is I'm going to click on the other slide or the other project that I've got open. I'm going to switch back to the project that I'm working on, click on window and then branching view, and you'll now notice that the branching view has updated to display the New South Wales branch, because I have implemented that navigation for New South Wales. What I might do now is I'm going to implement the Queensland information slides and also the South Australia information slides. I'm just going to do this quite quickly. I'm going to actually copy and paste the 3 slides that I've already created for New South Wales. So I'm just going to select these slides. I'm going to copy these slides, and then I'm just going to click after, or I'm going to click on the slide where I want these new slides to appear. I'm just going to do a Control V to paste, and then I'm going to Control V to paste again. And then of course what I want to make sure here is that the next lot of slides, I'm just going to move this out a little bit. So I've got New South Wales information slide 1, 2, and then the question. I've got Queensland, so I'm going to change that to Queensland information slide 1, Queensland information slide 2, and then there is the question for Queensland. And then I'm going, and I'll come back and change that question. And then I'm going to go into the last branch, and I'm going to change the labels here to say SA information slide 1, and then SA information slide 2. Now, of course, we need to set up the branching for these slides. So as we click on these buttons, they go to the relevant information slides. Now, just double checking, we've got New South Wales jumping to slide 3, which is the New South Wales landing page. We've got Queensland jumping to slide 4, which is the Queensland landing page, and then South Australia jumping to slide 5. And then what we need to do is go to each of those landing pages to set up the navigation onto the relevant information pages. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the continue button from the New South Wales landing page. I'm going to copy that button. I'm going to paste it onto the Queensland landing page like so, and I'm going to quickly update this button so it is jumping to the Queensland information slide like so. I'm then going to copy this button again, and then I'm going to go to the South Australia landing page, and then I'm going to paste that into the South Australia landing page, and I'm going to ensure that this button is jumping to the South Australia information slide. So now we're going to start seeing a more built branching view, which reflects the experience that our users are actually going to take. Now, once again, if I quickly go into the branching view It's not going to reflect the branching view because branching view needs to catch up with itself. If I flick to another project and then flick back again and then go into the branching view, you'll now see a little bit more of a structured branching view based on the experiences that our users are going to follow. I'm going to set up the common branch at the end, and this is going to happen after the South Australia question. So if I click on the last question, which is the South Australia question, I'm going to go back to the Queensland question slide. I'm just going to quickly change that to QLD, and I'll come back and change those answers in a moment. Now from here, from the last question slide, which is in a linear fashion, this is the last question or the last slide before the common branch picks up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to just copy one of the landing pages. So I'm going to go back to South Australia. I'm going to copy this landing page and I'm going to paste it after the last question. And if I just paste that in, and I'm going to call this one AUS for Australia. So this is the Australian landing page. And we're going to say, now that you have visited one of our states, and sorry if your state hasn't been included here, I do apologize for that. This, just as a little bit of a side note, this particular experience that I'm showing you here was actually based on a family holiday that I went on with my family, and these are the states that we actually visited. So that's why I've put this in here, and I created this for my kids to have a look at, and they really enjoyed it. So I do apologize if your state hasn't been included. We are now at the Australian landing page. I need to correct that. Now that you have visited one of our states, let's learn more about Australia. Of course, we need to set up the information slides as well. So I'm just going to select South Australian information slides. I'm going to copy those and I'm going to paste those after the Australian landing page. I'm going to go to the new information slide and I'm just going to call this AUS information slide 1. I'm then going to go into AUS and change the label for that one to say AUS information slide 2. And then of course we need a question. So after this information slide, we're going to insert a new question slide. This will be a multiple choice or could be any question. We'll just may as well stick with the capital. What is the capital of Australia? Newcastle. Something like Alice Springs. I'm going to quickly flick out of this project, go back into the other project. Let's have a look at our branching view to see how things are looking so far. We haven't got the information pages included yet. I do need to update some of the navigation. So I need to go back to the Australian landing page slide and update the continue button so it does jump to the Australian information slide. I need to also, let's have a look and see how that works. So I'm just going to flick out and flick back in again, window, branching view, and you'll now see that this branch has continued on. What we need to do now is we need to get the other branches, which are New South Wales and Queensland, branching back into the common branch, because at the moment they're just set up to continue along the linear fashion, which is basically the next slide that appears after it, which is why they're showing those next slides appearing there. Let's go back and have a look at the New South Wales question slide, and let's have a look and see what's happening here. So we've got a question, and going back to our example that we showed you before, we want to allow our learners to have a go at answering the question. If they get the question wrong, we send them back to the relevant information so they can understand the information, so reinforce learning, and then they can come back here and attempt the question again, instead of just giving them unlimited attempts at the question. When they're not really going to be learning anything, they're just going to be guessing. The way we achieve this is we go into the quiz properties of the question, and we'll see down the bottom here, we're not going to worry too much about any of these other options, but what we can do here, or we can shuffle the answers if we want, but what we are going to do here is we're going to say on success, which means if they get the question right, we want them to join up with the common branch, which is the Australian landing page. So at the moment, by default, the success action is just to continue, but we want to change this to say jump to slide, and we're going to select the slide, which is the Australian landing page. And hopefully you can start to see how helpful it is to label your slides. So this is just part of normal housekeeping that we tend to do when we're creating our Captivate projects. So we want to navigate to the Australian landing page if they get this question correct. If they get this question wrong, we want to give them one attempt, which is what it says here. We're just going to give them one failure message. And then on the last attempt, we actually want to jump them back to the slide which contains the relevant information, which in this case is the New South Wales information slide 1. Let's have a look and see how this looks from a branching perspective. So once again, going to jump out, jump back in again, go into window and branching view, and you'll now notice that the New South Wales question is continuing on to the common branch because we've set up that on success to jump to that slide, which is in this case the Australian landing page. But if they do get it wrong, we are sending them back to slide 6, which is the New South Wales information slide. Let's do the same for South Australia, and we're also going to do the same, or let's do the same for Queensland, and we're also going to do the same for South Australia as well. So close out of the branching view. Let's look for the Queensland question. I might actually start to name these slides as well. I'm going to go back to New South Wales. I'm going to go back to properties. I'm just going to call this one New South Wales question. And I'm going to go to the Queensland question. I'm going to label this now and call it Queensland question. I'm just going to change the answer from Sydney to Brisbane. Obviously, the most important thing about this, apart from the question and the answers, is if we go into the quiz properties, we're going to implement the same functionality. If they get the question right, we're going to jump to slide, Australian landing page. If they get the question wrong after one attempt, so we're giving them one attempt here, the number of attempts equals 1. After the last attempt, if they get it wrong, we're going to jump them back, jump to slide, and we're going to jump them back to the Queensland information slide, like so. Let's do the same for South Australia. So let's click on the South Australia question. We're going to change the properties to essay question. We're going to change the answer to Adelaide. We will shuffle the answers here. Now, even though this particular question slide does just continue on to the correct slide that we wanted to go to anyway, what I usually tend to do is I'll hard code these actions in, because you never know. This information might end up being moved somewhere else after reviews and after more information is added. So I do tend to hard code these actions in. Some people might have a different approach to this or different ideas, but just for this particular example, and just to carry on from the same pattern that we were creating with the other questions, we're now going to say for the South Australian question here, on success, if they get it correct, we're going to jump to slide Australian landing page. But of course, if they get it wrong after one attempt, we are going to jump them back to the slide that is the South Australian information slide. Okay, I'm going to quickly save this. And of course, to see the branching, I need to quickly jump out, jump back in again, click on the window branching view, and we'll now start to see our branching view taking shape. And this is really what we want it to look like. So we've got each of the branches being selected. A user can select one branch, they go down that branch, and then Once they've finished that branch and answered the question correctly, we then continue along the common branch, which they all need to complete that common branch. Rightio. Now, a couple of things that we need to have a look at. And first of all, if we do a preview of this, things aren't going to quite work out correctly. What you're going to notice is if we just preview now, get the question wrong for, say, New South Wales. So we're going to choose New South Wales. We get the question wrong. We're going to go back to the New South Wales information slide. We're going to navigate through each of these slides, and then we're going to come back to the question. The way that it's set up at the moment is it's not going to allow us to complete the question again. Just before we do this, let's put in some buttons. I'm just going to grab this continue button here, and I'm going to paste it onto the first New South Wales information slide. What I want to do here is on success, I'm going to jump to slide New South Wales information slide 2. Now there's a reason I've done that. I could have just go to next slide. I'm going to copy this slide or this button again. I'm going to paste it into here. And what I want to do here is I want this button to jump to slide New South Wales question slide. At the moment, I've just got normal navigation. And the problem with this, as I said, is that if we get this question wrong and we get sent back to the information to review based on the mechanics of the quiz, when we get back to the question, it's not going to allow us to attempt the question again. Let's have a look and see what happens. So preview HTML5 in browser. Okay, press play here, branch aware with return to quiz. We're going to select New South Wales. So I'm going to click on New South Wales. Here's the New South Wales landing page. I'm going to continue. I'm now going to look at the New South Wales information slide, read the information or not read the information. I'm in a hurry. I just want to continue. I'm just in a hurry. I want to continue. I then get to the question and I need to answer the question. And I didn't read the information. I answer the question and in actual fact, I get the question wrong. And it's going to send me back to the information slide. I then go through the information as I did before, but now when I get to the question, I can't answer the question again. Okay, now this is a bit of a trap because we might think, well, it should, how come it doesn't allow me to answer the question again? Okay, well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Let's have a look and see what's going on here. We need to remember that we only gave our users one attempt. Now we can leave it at one attempt because leaving it at one attempt will allow us to send the user back to the information after one attempt. We want to give them another attempt after they've viewed the information. So this is where we implement what's called return to quiz. And in actual fact, we can put this on any one of the slides that are part of that journey from the slide they get sent back to the question slide that they need to do again. And in actual fact, to show you how this can work is we're going to put the return to quiz functionality on the first information slide or information slide 1. And essentially what's going to happen here is when we send them back to this slide, they click on the continue button, which has return to quiz implemented. And instead of going on to information slide 2, they're just going to be sent straight back to the question slide to have another go at it. Okay, so we can actually leapfrog over information slides that aren't necessary to that question. So let's have a look and see how we implement this. So we click on the continue button for the slide where we want users to then return back to the quiz. And we're going to change this on success action from jump to slide. And we might need to scroll up the menu here and you'll see just above jump to slide, it says return to quiz. That's all we need to do. A quick save and let's preview this again. So preview HTML5 in browser. Okay, so we're now doing the preview. We're continuing on as per normal. The New South Wales button will take me to the landing page. So I click on the continue button, which is set up as jump to slide, information slide 1. Now here is the slide that has return to quiz implemented on it. Now, because I've just come from a normal slide and I haven't come from a question slide, or there's no history of a question slide as part of this experience, what it actually does is it just continues along the timeline. Now, if we look closely, when I click continue, you'll see that it is continuing along the timeline. It then takes me to the next slide, which is just a normal jump to slide or go to next slide. I click continue. I then attempt the question. I'm going to get it wrong to see what happens. It takes me back to the slide that contains the information. But because I've come from a question slide now, when I click on the continue button, which has return to quiz, it's going to return me back to the quiz slide. So I click on continue. It's now returned me back to the quiz slide, and I can have another go at answering the question. I'm going to get the question right. I'm going to click on submit. Correct. I'm now going to end up on the Australian landing page. I can click continue, and I need to fix all of this, but this is the Australian information slide, even though I haven't updated the information. And if I get this right, I'm not going to get it wrong because I haven't set up return to quiz yet. But if I get it right and click on submit and then continue, this is where my score isn't reflecting the true nature of the experience. Because don't forget, we only wanted to allow for the questions that were answered as part of that branch experience. Because I didn't go down the other branches, we don't want to incorporate the other two questions that weren't answered. So in actual fact, I do have an incorrect quiz result. So how do we fix this? Now, this is very, very simple. And all we do here is we need to turn on the functionality called branch aware. And we do this by going into the quiz menu. We click on quiz preferences, and then we click on, we open up quiz. We then go to quiz settings, and we can do this without actually uploading it to an LMS or turning reporting on. And there is a button in here, or a checkbox that says branch aware. So we tick the box that says branch aware, click on OK. That's all we have to do. Now we're going to preview this again. So click on preview HTML5 in browser. You'll now see that just by ticking that one little box, we have been able to make the project branch aware, so it only takes into account the questions that I answered. So I click on continue. I click on continue again. Here we go, catching up with itself. You'll notice what also has happened when you do click on branch aware, that it actually disables and removes the play bar. So branch aware doesn't allow for free-flowing navigation of a project. So please be mindful of that. Your table of contents won't work, or your play bar won't work. So navigation does need to be controlled specifically from within the project and how you set it up within the project and how the buttons work. So clicking on continue here, just quickly showing you, once again, if we get this wrong, it's going to send me back to the information that displays the information related to that question. Okay, I can read it now. I'm going to concentrate, click on continue, take me back to the quiz, click on Sydney because that's the correct answer, get the question right. It's now going to take me to the Australian landing page. I'm going to click on continue, Australian information slide 1. Don't worry about that information in there. I need to update that. It's taking me through. Obviously, I'd probably have buttons in there as well. But now if I get this question correct, now, of course, I could set up return to quiz exactly the same way that I set up return to quiz for my branches. But I'm going to get this correct. Click on submit, click on correct, and you'll now notice that the quiz results reflect the questions that I've answered. I've updated all of the relevant landing screens, and I've also updated all of the information slides for each state. So you'll see that the information within those slides is relevant to the state. So that's Queensland, for example, and then going into South Australia. I have also set up the return to quiz for each of these states. So for example, South Australia has been set up. If we get the South Australian question wrong, that will take us back to slide 12, and you'll see that I've got return to quiz set up on this button to take us back to the question if it gets wrong. And the same with the Australian landing page, and also the information slides, and of course now the question slide has the return to quiz functionality. To finish off, we're going to look at creating the JavaScript functionality, and then I'm just going to finish off with a couple of little extra added features, including the ability for the project to recognize which state the user actually visited as part of the branch. So whether that branch was taken manually by clicking on a button, or whether it was randomized through JavaScript, the functionality that we set up will be able to recognize which state or which branch the user went down. Let's do the JavaScript first. So we're going to go back to slide 2. I'm going to keep these buttons in here. I'm just going to move them up out of the way. And we're going to just place, I'm just going to use a star in this example, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the JavaScript from my other project, and this JavaScript script is actually available in the description below. So just follow the link to the resources page, which has all of the supporting resources, the files, the source files, and this script as well. So while I've got this button selected, I'm going to go in and grab the script from the other project. So I'm just going to select all of that, copy that, come back to the project that I'm working on, and while I've got the star selected, I'm going to select use as button, go into actions, and then I'm going to click on the drop down menu underneath on success and look for execute JavaScript. Then there is a button that appears called script window. I'll click on that, and then I'm going to paste this code in. We have to remember when we are dealing with slide numbers in JavaScript, especially when we are referring to this variable here that's mentioned inside of this JavaScript code. It says cp_cmnd go to slide. This is a Captivate system variable, and the way that this system variable works is that the slide numbering for a project actually starts at 0. In other words, our slide 1 is this variable's slide 0. If we wanted to randomize the navigation from the slides 3 through to 5, so randomly select a slide from either slide 3, 4, or 5, we actually have to take 1 away from those numbers. So it is in fact going to be select a slide from 2, 3, or 4. And that is essentially what we have got written here. So we just have to update the values where it says random from 2, and then the values, the lowest slide number -1, and then the highest slide number -1. And that's why our random slides that we are going to navigate to have to be in sequential order. So they have to be next to each other in the timeline. So we're going to just click on OK there, and where I'm just going to do hand cursor, disable click sound, display apply to all items of this type, and let's go in and do a preview and see how this works. So preview HTML5 in browser, press play, got our title slide, of course. I'm going to click on the star button. If I click on the star button, it's taken me to South Australia, just randomly. I'm going to refresh the browser window to see what happens again when I click on that star button. Clicking on the star button It takes me to South Australia again. Let's try refreshing again. Clicking on the star button again, and it's taken me to South Australia. Clicking on the star button again, it's taken me to New South Wales. So you see it's randomly selecting a slide between the lowest slide number, -1, and the highest slide number, -1. And those slides all need to be next to each other in sequential order in the project. That's how easy it is to set up the JavaScript. I want to remind you that we need to keep these buttons in the project. If we wanted users to select the path themselves, we can leave those buttons there. And if we wanted to give them the choice to select a random path, we can leave all of those buttons in there. If you just want to make this purely a random experience, then all we need to do is we need to grab these buttons and we can just actually move them off the screen or off the slide canvas area. If we go into window branching view, the reason we need to keep those buttons in there is because those buttons define the branches for everything else to work. The branching paths, the branch aware quiz functionality. And what we're also going to do now is we're going to look at adding a neat little trick whereby when we get to the Australian landing page, we're going to be able to recognize where they've come from. And this is where we are going to use the feature last slide visited. What we want to remember is that the last slide visited for each of the paths for each state are the question slides. For example, if they've been down the path of New South Wales, the last slide that they would have visited would be the New South Wales question slide. So that is slide number 8. The Queensland path, the last slide visited for the Queensland path will be slide number 11, and the last slide visited for the South Australian path is slide number 14. What we are going to do is we're going to set up a variable which will capture a value based on the last slide visited. So let's set up the variable first. To set up a variable, we go into project variables, and I'm just going to add a new variable that says var last slide visited state, for example. And I'm going to currently set that value to 0 because that's just what I do. You don't actually have to set it to anything. Let's put in the Australian landing page. We're going to say, now that you have visited, instead of one of our states, we're going to say, now that you have visited, and we're going to put the variable var last state visited. So insert variable by clicking on the X button in the properties panel. We are looking for a user variable because we did just create that variable. We're going to select var last slide visited state, maximum length 50 is okay. At the moment, if we were to run this project, it would say, now that you have visited 0. But we want to assign different values to that variable based on the path that they go down. So remembering last slide visited. There are a number of ways that we could actually achieve this same outcome. I find this is probably the easiest way, but there are other ways we could create other variables which get triggered depending on certain buttons getting pressed, and then certain variables will change value, and then we can test the condition of those variables and then return values based on the condition. So there are certain ways that we can do this. I find this is, for this particular type of example, this is, I find, the easiest. If anyone's got an easier way, I'm happy to hear it. Just leave a comment below. Let's go into project and advanced actions. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set up an advanced action which will execute when we enter this landing page for Australia. So when we enter the landing page, we're going to check the last slide visited and then update the variable based on the last slide that was visited. Let's say display, so the name of this action is display, let's call it display path visited. And then we're just I'm gonna create different decision points for each one. So I'm gonna create a decision point called New South Wales. I'm gonna say conditional tab. And this is where I'm going to say if, click on the first row, if the variable, and we're going to look for last slide visited. So if the last slide visited is, where is it? It's here. If info last visited slide is equal to, and we're just looking for the number, the New South Wales question slide, so 8, which we can see over here in the film strip. So we're just going to type in 8. We're going to then assign, so I'm going to hit the letter A for assign, and then we're going to assign, and I'm just hitting the letters VAR here to filter out those variables. VAR, last slide visited, so assign that variable with the literal value of, and I can just type in New South Wales, like so. Oh, let's get the casing right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this decision. So while I've got the NSW decision point selected, I'm going to click on the duplicate decision button. I'm going to change this one to QLD for Queensland, and then just change the values that I need to. So if the last slide visited slide is equal to 11, because that's the Queensland question slide, then we're going to assign the value or the variable with the value Queensland, and I just double clicked on that to update the value. So that's Queensland, and I think I might need to just try that again. Maybe I'll put double quotes around that, just because it did that automatically when we did New South Wales. And I'm going to duplicate this decision again for South Australia, so SA, and then the SA question slide is 14. So if the last visited slide is 14, assign the value or the variable with the literal value of South Australia. So this is where we can test which, and that put double quotes in then, so I'm going to actually take the double quotes out like so. There we go. I think maybe because I had spaces in there, in New South Wales I had spaces between the words, so it automatically picked it up as text. In Queensland I just had a single word, so it might have seen it as something else. But anyway, I'm going to delete these decision points just to tidy my advanced action. Then I'm going to save as action. I'm going to click on OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger that action on entering this slide, which is the Australian landing page. So I'm on the Australian landing page right now. I'm going to go into the Actions Properties panel. For the slide, I've got nothing selected, so I'm in the Slide Properties panel. On Enter, I'm going to execute advanced action, and the script that I wanted to execute is display path visited. Now here's something that I've learned the hard way in the past. These actions and things get triggered in a certain order. There are milliseconds involved here. I actually want the advanced action to execute before this text is displayed. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to ensure that there's a slight delay in this text being displayed, so there's enough time for this action to be executed. So this text, which actually contains the value of that variable that we want to be dynamic, I'm just going to make that come in at just 0.1 of a second after the beginning of the timeline. Chances are it's not a great concern, but I have found in the past that the order of things occurring can have a significant effect on the outcome and the output. So that's just a little bit of a safety net. I'm just going to leave it like that. I'll let you have a little bit of an experiment with that to see if there is any impact. But let's preview this in browser. So preview HTML5 in browser. Press play, branch aware with return to quiz. We're getting there, everybody. Click on the star and it's going to take me to South Australia. I'm going to continue again. I'm going to now get this question wrong just to double check and test my return to quiz. So wrong, it's going to take me back to the South Australian information slide 1. Continue there, which is return to quiz. Bring me back to the question. I can now select Adelaide. I'm now going to end up on the Australian landing page, and you'll now see that that variable has been updated, and it says now that you have visited South Australia, which was the path that I went down. Let's learn more about Australia. Now if I just refresh this page, I just want to double check to make sure that this works for other paths. Click on the star. I'm now in New South Wales. I'm going to continue again. I'm going to get the question correct, and again, so Sydney, correct. Now that you have visited New South Wales. So that seems to be working okay, and I wanted to bring that to your attention because that's a fun way to add a little bit of dynamic content into your project. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you today. So we've come in at about an hour. We've covered branching. We've covered some of the little nuances when working with branching, especially the branching view. So just be mindful that the branching view may not always update in real time. You might need to just give it a little bit of a kick along by going into another project and then back again, as we discovered there. We also looked at branch aware, which allows us to go back to certain information, which is related to a question if we've got questions in there. And so we were able to combine return to quiz to go back to certain information related to a question, and then making sure branch aware is turned on. We were able to make sure that users were able to have another or multiple attempts at answering the question after they'd been sent back to the relevant information. We've also looked at incorporating some very easy JavaScript into the project, and we've also seen how to create dynamic content, which I find in a project like this keeps it quite interesting because the information can change and adapt depending on the experience that the user had. And that's pretty much it. So all of the resource files and all of the supporting information is available below. And of course there is a time-coded table of contents in the description below, so you can jump back to any part of this video. Happy captivating, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.